All right. So all the participants are kept on mute, and very good evening. Very good evening to everyone. We are having rains here, so maybe the network may break down if the power goes out temporarily. But in any case, I will continue with the presentation because the slide sharing is most important. I welcome you all to the talk. A lot of people had registered, but so far they have not joined in today. We had a very big session yesterday, and today I'll be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic timeline 2020. This pandemic timeline becomes very relevant today for India and for the entire world of how India performs. And we have successfully mitigated the peak in a very good way. However, there has been incidences, and we all know the news where a lot of things can change now. And so the pandemic timeline becomes very important right now. So this webinar was made for the general awareness of how pandemic timelines are, what are the properties and how they change. So I run the firm called EPYA Biotech, and I run it with Mr. Ranjit as my partner, who is managing the event. And before this, this actually firm came in only in 1st of January. That is one day after the first confirmed case in Wuhan. And I was running another firm called Ecolite Lab before this. And unfortunately, we didn't have academic trainings in that format. It was mostly on outsourcing. So we started academic training because of SARS-CoV pandemic and because of the lockdown. So the talk may get a little extended and it's a heavy session. Please stay with me on this. So before actually going to the pandemic timeline, there are some definitions that I would like to clarify. The definitions, there are 6 definitions in total, which I would like to tell. First of all, the definitions which I'm talking about here is endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. These are the type of diseases, communicable diseases when it starts transmitting, and this is how they can be classified as. There's another definition called outbreak. We'll come to that later on. So endemic diseases usually do not outbreak. There's no outbreak, meaning to say the number of cases don't increase day basis. The disease is always maintained in the population, big or small population at a certain level, not necessarily a desired level, but an observed level. And examples are malaria and chickenpox. We know that malaria always exists in our population to some level. And sometimes the endemic disease, when it starts spreading immediately, it can cause an outbreak. Outbreaks are generally small, and when the outbreak increase, the epicenters are formed, and from the epicenter, the disease starts traveling outwards to other regions, and then the disease is given the epidemic classification. So epidemic disease outbreak is when disease increases rapidly above the baseline level and spread outwards from a localized area. We all know influenza virus, plague, syphilis. These all are classified as epidemic disease. So epidemic disease can outbreak seasonally, or they can outbreak independent of this season. Influenza, for example, is a seasonal outbreak epidemic, common cold. Finally, when the epidemic disease outbreak is so huge that it crosses international borders and through transportation routes, through air routes, ship routes, or any kind of transportation routes, the pandemic becomes uh, the epidemic becomes of a pandemic status. And examples from the past are Black Death. This was the plague of 14th century. Cholera, we have seen so many outbreaks in the 18th, 19th century. Spanish flu in 1918. USA was very badly affected with Spanish flu. Malaria also has a pandemic status because it was mainly a tropical disease of a tropical region of the globe. However, malaria spread through ship routes. Mosquitoes spread through the ship routes as well as through other means to countries which had no mosquitoes before, and they also started getting malaria. HIV, we know it started from African continent and then it is worldwide. It spreads worldwide. H1N1 bird flu, which happened in 2009, and fortunately, when the pandemic was spreading across, and it came until Pakistan, and somehow India had no cases of bird flu, and the pandemic crossed India to now infect Southeast Asia. SARS of 2003-2004, again, which began in China and which is a related virus to SARS-CoV-2 of coronavirus causing disease 2019. SARS outbreak started in China and spread to a lot many countries. There were only few cases in India. And now we have seen one of the biggest pandemic of the last 50, 100 years in the form of COVID-19 caused by a virus called SARS coronavirus 2. So these three definitions, we have three more definitions. That is transmissibility, infectivity, and prevalence. These definitions define the pandemic trajectory. Transmissibility is the ability to move between one host to other host, how the disease spreads and what is the rate of the disease spread is calculated by the rate of transmissibility. Transmission can happen either by air, water, or animals, and it can happen by human to human transmission, which is called as propagation. Infectivity directly relates to the virulence of the pathogen, and infectivity is measured by a term called incidence, which is a daily number of new cases, new infections, and they can be true cases wherein a person who has never contracted the disease is now contracted the disease, not a person who has recovered has reinfected, or incomplete recovery cases. True cases are different from normal incidences, which are calculated day-wise. And incidence actually ask the question how many people acquire the disease at a particular time. This is the main thing that it asks. There's one more definition called as prevalence. Prevalence is more importance. Prevalence is of more importance to. Ranjit, could you please mute? Okay. Prevalence is of more importance when we see endemic disease. Endemic disease. Prevalence asks the question of what is the probability of a population to get infected. So they don't usually measure the mortality, the probability of the population infected to get succumb to the disease. They measure it as a morbidity, or the population that is an high risk of getting the disease. And prevalence is the measure of the proportion of the particular population that can be found to be affected by the disease at a specific time. This time can be a yearly time, a lifetime prevalence, time with a few months span, called the period prevalence, and the point relevance at any particular time. So again, we come to the medical derivations. Medical derivations are important to understand the nature of the disease, and because the nature of the disease is something which will cause the pandemic timelines to change. And two things are there in the medical derivations. First thing is virus pathology and life cycle, and second thing is the host immune response. We know that SARS-CoV-2 is SARS-CoV-2 is a SARS-CoV-2 is a positive stranded single-stranded RNA virus and an enveloped virus. It is not a capsulated virus. So all the enveloped positive strand virus have this following 7 steps in the infection cycle, after which they start the transmission cycle or infection between one host to other host. So the first step of any viral infection is attachment of the virus surface protein on the envelope attached to the host receptors, and there are other proteins in the other structural proteins in the envelope which are important for fusion of the virus membrane or the envelope with the host membrane to cause a virus entry. As soon as the virus enters the host, the viral RNA is deprotonated and it undergoes translation. Because it is a positive strand RNA, it can directly form proteins, and it has long ORFs, and a polyprotein is formed, which is further cleaved and activated by viral encoded proteins. And after the cleavage, the virus forms many different small non-structural proteins that comprise the replication translation complex, a complex that will cause both the replication of the virus as well as the transcription of the virus and translation subsequently. And the virus replicates, viral RNA replicates after a lot of proteins are made. Once there is sufficient amount of virus RNA present, virion assembly happens, and the viral proteins involved in the assembly bind to the RNA and target it to the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, and where virus is covered with the cell membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum, the plasma membrane of the membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum, and it is vesiculated, and the virus is excluded by exocytosis. The second medical derivation, sorry for the disturbance. The second medical derivation is about the immune response. What happens when an envelope positive stranded RNA virus infects? The first line of defense, usually it escapes because the number of antigenic or immunogenic antigens on the surface of the virus are lesser compared to capsid virus. And so because of the lower count of the proteins on the surface of virus, they usually escape the first line of immune defense, and the virus enters the host and starts translating and replicating and producing proteins that compromise the IFN type 1 immune response, or the first line of defense of immune system of the host, and quietly replicate. After a few cycles of virus shedding and virus infection cycle, there are enough virus available on the outside of the cell and to be recognized by macrophages. And the viral proteins now overinduce IFN type 1 response in the immune cells, and the immune cells start producing cytokinins. And there is a rush of cytokinins. All types of cytokinins are produced, mainly IL-6 and IL-10, causing a cytokinin storm, also known as immune shock. And from here starts the acute respiratory distress syndrome, and it will lead to the multiple organ failure. So when the virus particle virions are actually engulfed by the macrophages, and macrophages also present the viral antigen along with other infected cells on the MHC class 1. So CD+4 Th T helper cell becomes the main role players of immunity after the first line of defense acts, and they modulate IgM B cells, which are specific to the viral antigens, to clonally propagate. And once this Th cells modulation begins, the entire cascade of humoral response sets in, wherein IgM producing B cells now start producing IgG, a new clonal population of the similar antigenic epitopes is produced as in the form of circulating antibody IgG. And this process usually take 8 to 9 years in 9 days in viral infection. And after this, even if the still virus remains in the system, the CD+8 TC cells are activated by helper cells, and they become the main defense against the virus by initiating the cell-mediated response, wherein the virus-infected cells are killed by the cells. So now we finally come to the epidemiologic derivations. So as I said, the trajectory depends on the transmission rate, and transmission rate is actually the rate at which the disease spreads. So it is calculated in a real-time pandemic trajectory, as in number of cases, daily cases per day. And there are some major measurements that are done. For example, R0. R0 is the basic reproduction number, or the number of cases that a particular one infection can produce. A secondary infection, how many cases it can produce before recovery. So R0 is usually seen in a non-immunized population, a population which has not encountered the virus before. So R0 applies to such population. After the disease pandemic goes in further time, more and more people get infected and recover. They start developing immunity also, perhaps. And R0 has no role to play then. And then what counts is the RE, which is the effective reproduction number, or the number of cases that can occur from one known case in the presence of immunized individuals in the population. Propagation, as I said, is the ability to move from one individual, human beings, to other by human-to-human transmission. And the main thing that calculates the speed of propagation, which also relates to the transmission rate, is the mean serial number. Outbreak and epidemic, as I said, they are used interchangeably, but outbreak are different from epidemic. Outbreak are usually limited to less than 10 new cases daily, whereas epidemic can go very high. And outbreak, so it is by meaning the sudden occurrence of a disease in a small time or space. And if we are seeing an entire country as a space, it may be going to few thousands only. So coming back to basic reproduction number R naught. So as I said, it is a number of new infections that one infected person can make in a particular before recovery. And the main problem with R naught number is that R naught is a dimensionless number, and it is not like doubling number, that it incorporates the time required to make those disease. It's only about how many infections one infected person can transmit before recovery. Second point is that it is not a biological constant. R naught changes rapidly during peaking of the disease as well as during the decline of the disease pandemic trajectory. R naught is not applicable on a vaccinated population, and it cannot be used for measuring simulated counts for vaccination trial programs. So R naught is calculated as a multiplication of beta into tau. Tau is a factor of time, and beta is number of contact cases. And in actuality, the values are not taken from field, but the values are taken from interpreted values of a projected pandemic timeline which would occur in future by the initial field values. So R naught is a calculated number, not a real number. And if R naught is greater than 1, that means one person can infect one more person before recovery. The disease can be called an outbreak. And depending on how fast it moves, it will be epidemic or pandemic if it moves beyond the international borders. Mean serial number is the time between one transmission to go to next transmission. What is the time between a person who is infected to transmit the disease and cause another infection? So that is counted by mean serial number. This will decide the speed of increase in the trajectory. In COVID, it is 3.96 days. Some researchers say 4 days. So one infected person can infect one more person in 4 days. In case of SARS of 2003, it was 8.4 days. So the rate of transmission per day was slightly lesser than COVID-19. The third important factor that determines the pandemic trajectory is the disease incubation period, or the time between the first contract of the disease till the development of symptoms of the disease. Younger age people usually have higher immunity, and they usually show longer incubation period. So R naught, mean serial number, and disease incubation period are related to each other. I will show the relation now, how it is. Before that, I will talk about two more definitions, two more factors basically which define the trajectory. One is asymptomatic. Asymptomatic can happen if the strain itself is asymptomatic, it is not producing enough virulence factors, or it's a condition basically where a patient is a carrier of the disease, may be a transmitter, may not be a transmitter, but experiences no symptoms. So either his immunity is strong, or the virus's strain with which he is infected has not enough virulence factors to cause a disease symptom. And the second one is super spreader. Super spreader is an unusually contagious human being who is more likely to infect healthy individuals than normally other human beings. So many super spreaders follow the 80-20 rule, which means that 20% of the population is capable of infecting the rest 80%. So in case of SARS, if a person could transmit more than 8 new transmissions, he would be called a super spreader. Now coming to the relation, this diagram shows the relation between incubation period and mean serial interval. And the white triangles are actually newly infected cases, and the dark circles are uh, onset of illness or symptoms. So from the time to infection to uh, onset of illness is known as the incubation period. What happens in symptomatic transmission is that the disease is transmitted only after symptoms are produced, and usually there is a lag between a first symptom of a first patient number one to new infection, and the total time, as you can see, is the mean serial period, which is always greater than the incubation period. In cases where mean serial interval is smaller than the incubation period, which is the case of SARS-CoV-2 causing COVID disease also, the incubation period is long and the mean serial interval is small. So there can be two kinds of things. First thing is pre-symptomatic, which has been the most dangerous aspect of the disease. A person starts transmitting the disease before himself showing the symptoms of the disease. And now the main factors that control is whether the mean serial interval is greater than 0 or less than 0. If it is greater than 0, a person who is infected will have the virus after few infection cycles. He will start transmitting to a new person, and he's not having the symptoms himself. He's not having the symptoms himself. And the mean serial interval is the time between the first symptom and the second symptom. It is heavily reduced and becomes smaller than the incubation period, but still greater than 1. In case the disease virulence changes over time, or certain cases where a new strain of the virus forms, the mean serial interval becomes negative, and a newly infected person can infect another person before himself getting symptoms, and the other person can develop a symptom faster than the patient one. Now, this is the relation between R naught and the mean serial interval. The mean serial interval is plotted on the x-axis, and here is the probability per day, probability density per day. You can see the graph. It's very steep graph for COVID-19, and a little flattened graph for SARS of 2003, 2004. So if the R naught is high, which is the case of SARS-CoV-2, the disease spreads quite fast. So we are not new to the disease outbreaks. We have a lot of disease outbreaks in the history of human civilization. We start from 14th century, the Black Death disease, which was caused by plague. A lot of Jewish people were falsely accused of spreading the disease by poisoning water wells, but the disease was spread by a flea, and it was a big find at that time. It infected 76 to 200 million people. Cholera, there has been around 6 cholera pandemics uh, worldwide between 1817 to 1860. 3 of them in India. 15 million people were infected. Russian flu again was a very big disease spread, which caused 1 million infection. Spanish flu started in 1918, and USA got very severely affected by Spanish flu. 500 million people. Malaria, as I said, is an endemic disease, and every year there is infection. Around 100 to 200 million cases worldwide are seen in malaria. Dengue also has some kind of similarity to endemic status, and 50 to 100 million cases are there. H1N1 bird flu, as I said, it was given the status of pandemic. It crossed 214 countries out of 218, and total 5.75 lakh deaths. Swine flu, it's not a pandemic, it is epidemic. 700 to 1.4 billion people have been infected by swine flu after 2009, when it was first observed. 12 to 21% mortality. SARS of 2002, 2003 had only 8,000 cases, but it was a pandemic. It spread globally, although at a slow rate, and mortality was high, 9.6. MERS usually has spread very little, and there were only 2,519 cases between 2014 2020, with a high mortality of 34.3. Ebola virus outbreak was given the epidemic status, 28,000 suspected cases, and very high mortality of 90%. Zika virus is again as endemic, and it doesn't even cause much outbreak, and very short period it increases. Nipah virus, 23 cases, 50 to 70% morbidity. Sorry, Nipah is the endemic. Zika is again outbreak. Nipah is endemic disease, and morbidity counts here, proportion of population which are susceptible to get the disease. SARS-CoV-19 of 2020, already 15 million, more than 15 million people are infected, and the mortality rate is 6.2 right now. So if there exists a disease risk factor, there is a chance of spreading of the disease, and the spreading can cause outbreak. Outbreak, if it increases outwardly from the epicenter, it becomes epidemic, and epidemic, if it crosses border, it becomes pandemic. In this process, it's all cyclic process. For example, if the epidemic is started, the population starts developing immunity or vaccines are available, a pandemic can be reverted back to epidemic, and the epidemic can be reverted back to outbreak. So when it comes to outbreak, either it is eradicated, like polio was eradicated, or it can go into endemic status and come back from endemic status again. Likewise, endemic can straight away jump into epidemic status. So this is the entire cycle of communicable disease, and the chances of occurrence from left to right, it reduces. Chances of causing severe health and economic impact increases. I will show two graphs here which define pandemic trajectory. First one is the Salmonella infection in USA. As you can see, these are the infection caused by a single outbreak initially, and this is the graph by multiple outbreak. A single outbreak has a Gaussian curve. Gaussian curve, a typical bell curve, where the maximum midpoint and say two halves of the midpoints are equal area. However, when there are multiple outbreaks, the curve, the pandemic curve gets skewed. This curve is skewed towards the right, so it's a positive skew. Means it's got more long tail in the right side. The second is the endemic curve. You can see most of the area. This is for dengue in USA again. Most of the time in the year, the disease is maintained at a small rate. There are certain outbreaks around 120 in particular months. Uh, these outbreaks can be relate to an outbreak basically of an endemic. So normal pandemic trajectory, a Gaussian curve. The Gaussian curve can change shapes because of different factors. First of all, the factor is what is the frequency of counting. You can count number of daily cases or number of cases per capita, depending on whether you want to rely on the midpoint as a mean, median, or mode. These are three same pandemic trajectories, but using different frequencies, and they have a different midpoint. One of them is mean, median, and mode. Second thing which can change this shape is called technically, statistically called dispersion, where a number of daily cases may be outliers to the normal trajectory course because of very unprecedented conditions, because of the actual characteristic of the disease, or because of variations in incubation period. They can go high or less, and accordingly the shape can change at any portion of peaking up or decline for any period of time. The last I talked about is skewing. It can be a positive skew, which is right-handed skew, which is in A. The tilt is towards the left, or it can be a left-handed skew or the negative skew, where the tilt is towards the right. So A is usually the case of all pandemics. It rises steeply logarithmically and slowly it declines in a long tail. For example, hepatitis. It's a single point disease. The break was from single point, and when multiple point breaks started, the pandemic straight rose exponentially and came in a slow decline, slightly positive skew. Second case I talk about is diarrhea, which is not a common point, which is a common point, but multiple outbreaks, and the common point was not known. It was an experiment. They couldn't figure out what is the source of infection. It came out to be the water tanks that were infected, and whenever they stopped the water tanks, the pandemic curve declined, and whenever they released it, it increased. And this is how the pandemic trajectory was affected because of multiple point source, a single point common source, multiple points, multiple time points. And when the government orders came for boiling water, also you can see a sudden decline. And when chlorination came in, there was again decline, and it was controlled. This peak is measles peak. Measles children are super spreaders. You can see multiple peaks here. This is because of two different incubation periods that occur in measles. The incubation period is 11 days, and the disease also can move fast in some people. So every peak is around 11 days away from each other. So mean serial interval is faster than the incubation period. So you can have multiple peaks. Finally, there can be a mixed peak, which is Shigella outbreak. People who attended a party where the staff of the party were infected with Shigella, uh, and the staff infection is shown in the small trajectory. And after the party finished, 3,000 attendees, most of them got infected, and they got infected at a very high rate, and they are dual peak called multiple peaking. There is one more important factor which I need to talk about is logarithmic versus linear scale. In linear scale, the y-axis has equal numbers at equal intervals, like left hand side is the linear scale. Every interval is 10,000 number of cases, cumulative cases. Cumulative cases will give a sigmoid peak, whereas daily cases will give a Gaussian peak. Whereas logarithmic scale, every interval increases logarithmically. First interval is 100 to 1000 cases. Second interval is 1000 to 10,000 cases, tenfold high. So why is logarithmically used is because these are the same data. Left and right data are same. And first one is Ebola virus case. Logarithmic helps in finding out increased accelerated rates of disease transmission, which is not visible in the real-time assessment. In linear scale, you can see the disease immediately peaked up and slowly lessen the rate of increase, which is not visible in the linear scale. Likewise, during the decline, you can have a much high resolution of the peak in the logarithmic scale. So mitigation is a method to reduce the steep of the peak or reduce the angle of the peak. And mitigation can be enacted by social distancing or extensive social distancing, which is reducing the contact probability socially by 60%. A slow growing peak always is beneficial because it protects health system and it allows them to work efficiently. We have 1 minute left. There are a few slides in the first half. We will log in after a 10 minutes break after this 1 minute gets over. We'll take questions in the last. So anyway, so it also helps in efficient quarantine and faster eradication of the disease for an effective suppression. Suppression is another form of mitigation, and it's a short point mitigation, and it is applied on a short point. And these are impractical to be performed on a larger time scale. When the mitigation is happening, suppression strategies are designed based upon a pre-decided simulation of how the pandemic trajectory will project and which points, time points, suppression has to act. Suppression can include extensive social distancing, like to reduce your probability of interpersonal contact by 75%. And the main objectives of suppression is to rapidly suppress the transmission and minimize the near-term cases as well as the death. So it is calculated based upon models wherein you say that the death may increase per million population at such a point according to a certain projected trajectory. Suppression strategy, that's why, are greatly benefited by doing random testing, rapid testing, as well as uh, managing healthcare system by increasing bed capacity, managing bed, how much time the patient need a bed at what point of time. So coronavirus is a very large family of viruses, enveloped positive strand virus, all of them are, and they are spherical. So they infect humans and animals both. And this virus family is also called as Coronaviridae family, and it has two types of viruses: the spherical virus, which is subfamily Coronaviridae, or the kidney and the rod-shaped Torovirinae. The RNA genome is always a positive strand RNA genome with overlapping ORFs. Um, the the virus replicates are translated by overlapping ORFs, and the ORFs are usually long and make polyprotein, which are later on cleaved by viral encoded proteases. And the virus includes most of the viruses with the largest RNA genome, which is around 30 kb, a single stranded RNA. Around 28 to 32 kb is the range. And there are four genera in the coronavirus: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Gamma and delta viruses usually infect animals and birds, and there are no human infective viruses in this region. Alpha and beta viruses, coronaviruses genera, have both human as well as animal virus. So HCOV, or the human coronavirus, all these numbers 229E, NL63, and beta form OC43 and HKU1 are caused in humans, and they usually don't cause outbreaks. And China have regular cases every year of HCOV. Uh, we have seen SARS virus and other SARS-like viruses are also present in the beta coronavirus genera. The SARS coronavirus 1, which is of 2003-2004, which caused a pandemic, as well as the MERS outbreak, which happened in Saudi Arabia, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus, both belong to beta coronavirus. Right now, even this SARS-CoV-2, which caused the COVID-19 disease, is in beta coronavirus family genera. So this is the basic structure of all the coronavirinae subfamily. There is a double lipid membrane spherical virus, and the membrane has viral proteins, these structural proteins. There are 3 to 4 structural proteins. Here 3 are shown. the spike proteins which are involved in attachment of the virus to the host cells, and the membrane protein has embedded also envelope virus and the membrane virus, which help in the fusion of viral envelope with the host cell membrane and releasing the RNA genome into the host during viral entry process. And this is the phylogenetic tree with representative viruses from all the four genera of alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Gamma and delta virus, as I said, no human infective viruses are known. These two are this is gamma group and this is the delta group. Whereas alpha group has some milder flu causing viruses. And beta coronavirus has seen the third outbreak and two pandemics, SARS-CoV of 2003 as well as the SARS-CoV-2 causing COVID-19 of 2019-20. So SARS-CoV-2, the beta coronavirus genera is again classified in four lineages: lineage A, lineage B, lineage C, and lineage D. MERS virus are categorized in lineage C, whereas SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 are categorized in lineage B. And this lineage B are quite distant in phylogenetic relationship with MERS virus. One peculiar feature of this virus is that it has zoonotic behavior, meaning it can transfer from animals to humans through intermediary host. So China is a home to a lot number of bats, many species of bat, and huge numbers of bats are there. Bats are very important for ecological balance, and they have strong immunity, and they become home to many different types of coronaviruses which are evolving inside their bodies without sickening and without killing the bats. So there is always a coronavirus ancestor in a bat, sometimes in birds, and it keeps propagating from bat to bat through intraspecies transmission. And some point there may be some changes, especially in the attachment proteins, the spike proteins, which may change the specificity to infect animals like cattle, domestic cats, dogs, camels, and from here they get transmitted to human beings either through food, through medical cases, medical proximity, or through normal human to human propagation. As you can see, most of the cases that came from eating of infected animals were from alpha coronavirus group, whereas beta coronavirus is mostly spread by human to human propagation. And how they entered into human is also just similar to the human to human propagation. So SARS-CoV-2 as well as SARS of earlier 2003-2004 are the lineage B beta coronavirus. So specific to the case of SARS-CoV-2, like I said, it was propagating already. The progenitor was propagating in the bats as coronavirus ancestors, and from the bats, somehow either through food or through direct contact or through intermediate contact, it entered human beings and started spreading from human to human in a very rapid fashion. And we have a research platform to discuss these two studies in detail in session 2 and session 3. These are paid research platforms. So the entire confusion whether coronavirus from the bat repertoire, the progenitor, came through eating infected bat or came through intermediary host like a pangolin, which was present in the live meat market. This confusion started from investigative journalism, and then bioinformatics started to disapprove investigative journalism, and the story moved back and forth many times. And right now, most acceptable is the intermediary host and less probability through food because of the following crux. The crux is the first point: when the confirmed cases began in January, they were not necessarily related to the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan. Second point was that the bats were hibernating in China before the confirmed cases, when actually the two cases started coming up and were not recognized by China during November 2019. The bats were entirely on hibernation. They were not available in the seafood market. The virus was very closely related to one bat virus called bat rat G13 coronavirus, 96.7% genomic similarity, which is very high, and which indicates that it is quite close origin from this particular virus. They have a common ancestor very close by in time, maybe a year or 1.5 year back it would have evolved. But this virus relative was a gastrointestinal colonizing virus, not a respiratory virus. Second, later on in Malaysia, they found dead Malayan pangolins containing SARS-CoV. which were 90.3% genome similarity with the SARS-CoV-2, which infects human being. And the find also explained why SARS-CoV-2 was very close to this particular species of bat infecting virus, but slightly more distant to other bat infecting viruses, like 70% similarity. And the this explained that mostly it's a pangolin. Pangolins are known to sneeze regularly, uh, and maybe that's how they spread the disease to by human contact. And there were live pangolin present in the seafood market during November when the disease outbreak actually began. So the difference between SARS, COVID-19, SARS of 2003 and MERS are represented in this figure. You can see COVID-19 has infected almost entire world, and SARS a few countries were spared. MERS didn't spread much. Mostly it was Middle East and some portions of US and some portions of China. And the disease vary in different disease characteristics. Like R naught is 2.6 number of persons a person can infect, 2.6 for COVID-19, 2.2 to 3.6 for SARS, and less than 1 for MERS. So MERS basically is not an outbreak, and they calculated varied from zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.8 R naught. Incubation period also varied. SARS-CoV-2 causes SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19, which has an incubation period of 5 to 14 days, averaging at 5.5 days, and SARS had 2.27 days. MERS it was variable, 5.3 days. Mean serial interval is around 4 days for COVID-19, 8.4 for SARS, and 6.8 for MERS. And here's the interesting fact that a person can get a disease symptom in 5.5 days average, but can already start infecting at the 4th day onwards. Infectivity is usually by community transmission, human to human propagation. Infectivity in case of SARS propagation was mostly if you visit the hospital where people undergoing treatment from SARS are present, and then only you get a contract the disease. And infectivity was very low in case of MERS. Even the hospital cases were very low. Only very close contact, family contacts was very high. And second was that this virus propagated in camel, and there was a direct camel to human transmission seen. Camel herders were highest among the infected. Mortality also changes. 4.5%. This was initial measured mortality of COVID-19 before it went to United States of America. 9.63 for SARS, 34.46 for MERS. Recovery period is 17 to 27 days in the milder cases of COVID-19, 21 to 40 days in the most severe cases. SARS takes several weeks, MERS takes 21 days. To contain the disease, complete lockdown of the country was most essential for COVID-19. It was not as essential for SARS, but there was an indefinite travel restriction, and indefinite travel restriction was not important for controlling MERS. Only a time-bound travel ban was imposed. This is the same thing pictorially described the infection cycle. The virus spike protein gray is recognizes ACE2 receptor. There is another protein called TMSPPR, transmembrane serine protein protease, from the host, which cleaves the viral spike proteins to activate them and make the envelope and membrane protein accessible, and to allow fusion of the virus. Virus enters, RNA is uncoated, RNA undergoes translation using the host translation machinery to form the longest ORF, ORF1A and ORF1B, the green ORF. And the ORF forms the polyprotein, which is cleaved by a viral encoded protease to form the replication transcription complex, and further overlapping RNAs are made from this transcription replication until a lot of copies of full strand positive RNA strand is made, and a lot of proteins are made. Proteins then guide the RNA to the ER and the Golgi, forming the endoplasmic reticulum Golgi induced complex, where the virus particles are assembled, vesiculated, and shed by exocytosis to infect new host cells. Disease prognosis symptoms. When I talk, the day 1 symptom is mild, and cough will be there, short breathness, muscle fatigue, and pain. Day 2 to day 3, symptomatics appear as dry cough, and from 3 to 5, the symptoms worsen, breathing difficulties appear. 5 to 7 is the time when the cases go critical and mostly require admitting to the hospital. There is heavy viral shedding during this day to 7, 5 to 7. At 8th day, there is shortness of breath, a pneumonia is induced, water is filled inside the lungs, and acute severe respiratory distress is observed. and intubation is provided to improve the oxygen intake for the patient. And fertility starts from day 8, and day 10th is the time when most of the fertility has happened, and further severeness in the symptom is seen. ICU is highly recommended. Those who recover in 17 days and are discharged in 27 days. And even after 12 to 14 days after recovery, they shed viral load, and so they are recommended strict quarantine at home for 14 days to 28 days. So as you see, the virus first infects the upper respiratory tract, and this takes around 2 to 3 days. And when it starts infecting the lower bronchial tract, the symptoms start appearing. Bronchial epithelium have high content of ACE2, and the virus forms a good colony inside the pulmonary tracts as well as the lung cells. It replicates many cycles of infection, releasing a lot of viral loads, and antigen presentation will lead to the activation of humoral response, as well as further go into the cell-mediated response. So mortality by age and gender. How is the mortality affecting age and gender? First thing, this graph came from Italy, and it was known for all cases, 60% were males and 30% were females of those who died of the infection. So the disease was more lethal to males as well as more infective to males also. Mortality by age group over 80 years were more susceptible to the disease at a mortality of 21.9, whereas uh, 40 to 49 age group were less than 2% mortality, and the disease was usually asymptomatic for less than 10 years age. So anyone who is aged 70 are more susceptible to contract the disease as well as succumb to the disease in case of SARS-CoV-2. It is similar to SARS characteristic, but not similar to MERS. MERS had a 52.7% mortality for 80 plus age, and it was not age dependent. Mortality by ethnicity, initially they projected that Asians have density of higher density of ACE2 protein, and so they are prone to more infection, but it was not the case. This also said that Europeans and African Americans were having lesser density of ACE2 and they could be protected, which was falsified, and there were no strong evidence to prove it either. When you come to transmission facts, the virus is active or infective for 3 hours in aerosol, 4 hours on copper surface, 24 hours on paper, 48 to 72 hours on plastic and stainless steel. It can be easily disinfected by using SDS containing non-glycerin soaps or alcoholic disinfectant that rupture the lipid membrane or the envelope of the virus. And it can also be the surfaces can be disinfected by hypochlorite. Hypochlorite is a little harmful chemical. It stays back on the surface for a longer time. Hydrogen peroxide fumes are used to disinfect air, but they are highly unstable and they vanish within minutes to hours, and you have to continuously fume the air. There are no evidence to say that high temperature can reduce the viral transmission. However, as the summer comes in, the virus may be uh, the transmission may be slightly affected by increased exposure to UV because of long days during summer. Virus shedding happens in saliva, sputum, nasal and eye discharge, lung lavage or the fluid that fills in the lung while the pneumonia sets in. A small reduction also seen in feces. Initially, there was no strong evidence of vertical transfer from mother to child during childbirth or passing through placenta or even through lactation. But recently, last week, papers have come in where two mothers were found to contain the viral RNA in the milk, and it is currently researched heavily. There was also a report earlier on where 15 mothers' milk was known to have antibodies that give protection against uh, SARS-CoV-2. That has potential of giving protection against SARS-CoV-2 in the milk. So virus shedding occurs from third to fifth day of infection, and it continues 10 to 12 days after recovery. Asymptomatic cases are generally seen at children below 10 years of age, but they may not be transmitters. There's no evidence that a carrier child below 10 years of age can transmit the disease. Cross-species barrier is very negligent. Only one case of domestic cat in UK and one case of Bronx Zoo tiger called Nadia was reported among the first 8 lakh human-to-human transmission cases. And furthermore, cases of domestic cats came in when we were 42 lakhs human-to-human transmission. But however, there has not been even a single case detected from animal to human transmission. Transmission occurs mainly through aerosols, which are formed by sneezing and coughing or heavy breathing of the infected, and also by touch with close contact. Also touching infected surface and transferring to eyes and face. Biosafety level is assigned BSL-3 or BSL-3 plus, which is second highest biosafety level. The pandemic has typical characteristic. It goes in 4 stages. Stage 1, where only foreign cases are seen. Stage 2, where the foreign cases start infecting the local population, and infection is seen in primary contacts of the foreign returned cases or secondary contacts of the foreign returned cases. Community transmission, most of the cases are seen in people with no travel history or no secondary contacts or primary contacts who have travel history. And the pandemic trajectory peaks up very logarithmically, very steeply. Outbreak stage or the pandemic stage is when the infection starts spreading rapidly from local epicenter. There can be more than one epicenter in a country, and it spreads in all direction from the epicenter through transportation routes. So this is a typical pandemic trajectory. It is a positively skewed trajectory with a long tail for the decline and a shorter peaking stage. Peaking is usually logarithmic, so it peaks up very fast. And if you do nothing, the peak continues logarithmically till a lot of people are infected, and now depends on herd immunity of the population to bring it down. However, when you do social distancing, the peak angle with the x-axis changes, it reduces. It is called mitigation, and mitigation has to be suppressed. And immediately at this point, you have to incorporate suppression strategy, wherein you increase the mitigation for short while. And mitigation suppression is usually done to bring the peak flattened within the health capacity of the country. And that after this is achieved, the hammer zone starts, where you continuously give suppression cycles in decline of the peak to cut the virus growth. These are the factors that you need to take care during the peaking and the decline of the peak. And finally, when you have successfully overcome the pandemic trajectory has a propensity to rise again as soon as you release lockdown, and several small outbreaks happen. The main point you have to consider here is you have to keep the R naught below 1 by improved healthcare system, by using proper suppression for banning gatherings and uh, uh, banning social contacts, increasing testing, contact tracing, quarantining, as well as isolation. So as I said, this is an unmitigated peak, and this is a mitigated peak, the shaded one. And at stage 1, the main aim is to slow the acceleration of the cases, and at the stage 2, the main aim is to reduce the peak by number of cases, and in the stage 3, the main aim is to reduce overall cases and check out the health effects of how the healthcare system is affecting the pandemic trajectory. And this is the real-time picture showing how mitigation and suppression can reduce the disease incidence to a level which is within the limit of the healthcare capacity, which is a line in orange. So mitigation steps: social distancing, intensive social distancing, lockdown, seal down, hotspot identification. Suppression strategies: extensive social distancing, more than 70% probability of social mixing is avoided. Ramping up as well as random testing of the population. Hospital bed management, counting how many beds are there, how long it can be engaged per patient, and boosting up healthcare capacity or increasing the number of hospitals or testing centers or beds in the hospital at regular time points. So this was given by Imperial College. Most of the statistics were made on initial stages during stimulated graphs of what projections of pandemic would be, and most of them came from UK. UK has a very complex healthcare system. So unmitigated, they said, from unmitigated, if we apply social distancing on whole population, they could reduce the cases scenario by 50%, another 5% if they enhance the social distancing of the elderly, and if they include 2 suppression point, they could overcome the disease. And the red line here shows the number of beds available per million of UK citizens. And this is the projection they had made, how many people would require ICU at what point time of the pandemic, and how many will be hospital patients in that point of time. And based upon this, they enacted their pandemic mitigation as well as lockdown as well as suppression. Again, the same trajectory. When you do nothing, the pandemic trajectory appears like this in simulation, and this red one is the hospital beds available per million. And if you have a case isolation, household quarantine, as well as general social distancing, it becomes the orange peak, a very mitigated and less number of. If only the schools are closed, it's a green peak. You can have the mitigation at the later date, but as soon as the social distancing is still going on and schools only are closed. Now this graph is again, you can see the rise. Again, it's a stipulated graph, and here it shows what RO of the disease is. While in the climb, the RO is at 2.4, and it has been calculated by 2.4 RO. And R naught at the decline stage has to be at 0.62. This was calculated based upon this simulation. When it comes to Hubei, where the disease actually outbreak, Hubei undergoed lockdown in 23rd January, and you can see the disease increasing rapidly. And after the lockdown, fourth, fifth day after the lockdown, suddenly there was decrease in cases, and there was some kind of release of lockdown after almost 20 days, and suddenly case rised. These are artifacts where the diagnostic definition was changed. Initial kits of diagnosis were not correctly diagnosing, and the disease came down. This is the actual peak of entire of China. You can see it's a Gaussian peak, slightly tilted to the left. That is a positive skew, right? Rightly skewed. And the same graph, the blue shades are the onset of actual disease, and the yellow shade of is diagnosis of the date of diagnosis of the disease. So onset of disease before and diagnosis comes later. There's an incubation period between this. So as soon as the lockdown was enforced, there was a sudden decline of the number of cases, and they started counting true number of cases, those people who had not had a hospital history. And the peak was mitigated by repeated suppression in the 12-day delay between the lockdown and the official cases. So pandemic ideal control, this is the pandemic situation of the world, and this is the same graph. So ideal control is to bring the pandemic, flatten the peak within the healthcare capacity, and you have to do certain things at certain point intervals of the pandemic trajectory, and that's what makes pandemic trajectory prediction very important. First stage, reduce your propagation, develop better diagnostic methods, develop better healthcare capacity, and start suppressing, and then build up a cure or immunity to the virus. Develop healthcare relief because healthcare would have exhausted. Develop better surveillance of the recovered cases and cases undergoing treatment. And this is best enacted by Germany, which has a 3-stage national pandemic plan directly into the legislation. Once the plan activates, it moves into the three stages automatically based on time and consequence or aggressiveness of the disease, from containment stage to protection stage to mitigation stage. And in this stage, the government plan comes up as to reduce morbidity and mortality, and to ensure treatment of infected people, to help upkeep essential public service. And they also have a policy for quick changing of policies by decision makers, by media, and by public, which can be activated only during the special national pandemic plan. And Germany did very well in controlling the number of deaths because they have this plan right from the Second World War, where pandemic prevented them from growing. So we can have a 10-minute break. I have a very quick slide view for talking about comparative pandemic trajectory of different countries. Person, whether he's infected or not, that is 2 meters, and do not gather in large gatherings, groups, and stay out of crowded places and avoid mass gatherings. And anybody who has joined the Telegram group, I have shared a simulation on this web page. I can share it in the email also. And this actually tells real-time simulation, not related to COVID, but general simulation of how the community practices can change the pandemic course and change transmission rates in a very visually explicit way. So role of quarantine. Quarantine comes from a Latin word for quaranta. Quaranta means 40 days. Quarantine referred to the time of Black Death in the 14th century, where ships infected with rats had sailors infected with plague, and they were quarantined on the bay and not allowed to enter the mainland for 40 days. Now the quarantine definition is 28 days for any disease. And in case of COVID-19, the entire country except for Kerala is maintaining a 14 days quarantine for susceptible and high risk and a 28-day for confirmed case. Kerala has complete 28-day quarantine for all cases. Isolation means isolation of active and but recovered cases for 14 days enforced by law. This is after recovery. You have to have isolation, self-isolation. And home quarantine, quarantine is always enforced by law. Home quarantine is a concept of Europe and especially of UK, where a person quarantines himself on his own wish and quarantines within the house, the elderly from the young. And quarantine, self quarantine, or enforced quarantine can be also incorporated in home quarantine. And this was done for foreign returned negative cases for 28 days and 14 days for susceptible cases. Self isolation, again, I said, is home quarantine in UK. Age-based restriction within house. Curfew is a short-term enforcement of lockdown. We had a public curfew, which was enacted by public. So it is to provide a break in the infection cycle. It proved it is not very useful for diseases which have a very short incubation period or short transmission period of 4, mean serial interval of 4. It is not really very valuable there. It will anyway go into long hiding and sudden bursting. So immediately after curfew, there was a countrywide lockdown where the entire population was restricted in movement. And there's a seal down, which means cordoning the hotspots. And Hubei, which is the capital of Wuhan, where the disease started, went on a seal down. It was fashionably called the Hubei style lockdown. So these are some pandemic trajectory of one particular pandemic called the Spanish flu in USA in 1918. The disease went on till 1920, 1922, and you can see the deaths number of deaths per day in different cities of USA. A very steep and very Gaussian peak you can see here. The both the halves at the midpoint are almost equal area, and this shaded area is when social distancing was enacted. And Philadelphia, what happened in San Francisco is immediately after the release of social distancing, the disease peaked up again until it was controlled with better healthcare capacity. New York, which had a 11-day ahead lockdown or 11-day ahead social distancing, uh, maintaining a maintaining a social distancing even before the disease started increasing as outbreak. New York is always heavily dense city. So here you can see it performed very well, and the disease was minimized at the end of the social distancing. It didn't rise up to very high level also. There was a double peak here as in St. Louis. As soon as the disease rised, lockdown was enforced, and a premature release of lockdown to relieve the essential service was carried out, where the disease peaked up again, and second social distancing was enacted to bring down the peak. So a lot of pandemic study came with this data in from the USA, and they were the masters of pandemic epidemiology at one point of time. And these are the different cities. You can see different shapes are there. The disease is one, the time frame is one, but and the country is one, but different cities. So all sort of shapes have occurred, and the shaded areas are where social distancing is maintained. So this is the effect of social distancing on a regular disease. You can see Kansas. There was a short period of relief of social distancing, and they had a double peak even in the social distancing enacted time. It's the same disease. So this graph is a simulated graph which tells what's the probability or likelihood of catching the disease. Likelihood less than 1 in the white region when the country is performing so many cases scenario, and you are going on a gathering of so many people, a dinner party with 10 or a music festival with 1 lakh people. So you will always have a less than 1% chance from a positive attendant to the program if the country is less than 100 cases total. when you have 1 lakh participants to the event. However, when you are attending a small party also and the cases are very high, you have a less than 1% chance of, and this is 2%, 10%, 50%, and 90%. This is what assesses the dangers that can be avoided by social distancing. So you cannot think of attending even a small concert when the country has 1 million cases. You will have a 90% chance of contracting the disease with a single positive case in your event. So mask culture greatly reduces the spread of the disease. South Korea was an example. We'll come to that. Mask, which can reduce the disease, is N95 respirator. It has a 0.007 micron and 99.9% efficiency to control the disease transmission, generally used for medical purpose. Surgical mask is generally used for social purpose with the same filter after triple layering, but it has a 63% efficiency because it doesn't cover the entire nose and it still leaves the gaps. So it reduces aerosols. It prevents flu-like symptoms, restricts sneezing aerosols within 1 meter of a person who is sneezing. N95 will reduce the incidence of the chance of infection by 3 logarithmic decimal points. But N95 is costly, as well as too much of civil use can cause shortage of medical and healthcare facility, and more deaths will occur because of shortage in medical and healthcare facility than COVID itself. So Break the Chain was initiated by Kerala. Break the Chain is to cause a short-term absentia or short-term absentia from social meetings, so that the disease doesn't get time to change. It was not very successful model, Break the Chain, because the disease spreads in multiple hotspots. You cannot judge it, and also this disease has a high RO of 2.6. So chain break is most effective under highly controlled movement or situations like lockdown, extended lockdowns. Thermal scanning was very important, especially for India. Initial thermal airport scanning, though it doesn't say any much details, only scans the temperature, and they're very preliminary test. But because the disease is a traveler's disease, it came to India only by air route. So this was an important step. And if the quarantine was done well, which it was, we didn't get any cases for next 2 months after the first case in Kerala. So thermal scans are still in process of development, and good AI chips are required to use it at the present moment. We cannot use the same thermal scanners for screening anymore. Contact tracing is to trace out people who have contacted any person who got detected of the disease. And some examples, powerful examples, come from China. China, virtually everybody can be traced on mobile apps, and so that came to very good benefit for China's disease control. Within 2 months, 3 months, China could eradicate out the disease, almost literally speaking. Contact tracing also was very efficiently used by South Korea. So they had a self quarantine app, which all persons who contracted the disease and went to quarantine had to download. And if they remove the app, they will be heavily fined, 2,000 Korean dollars. American contact tracing failed miserably initially, but later on they paced up the quality. Contact tracing was also effectively used by Russia. India has a below par contact tracing because of the number of people present here, and because of less digitalization. They had an initial success in contact tracing while airport screening was going on. And an example I'll give is Lombardy cluster. Lombardy is like a district in Italy, and it was the entire of Lombardy caused by one single patient number one, which was a super spreader, and he had made 6 hospital visits, and contact tracing failed to get back to the patient number one, and by the time he had spread the disease in the biggest district in Italy. So as I said, suppression strategies are greatly benefited by rapid testing, as well as examples of random and rapid testing. The best example comes from South Korea. South Korea tested almost 5.5% of their 6.4 crore population in a very short span. They were doing almost 20,000 cases during initial peaking of the pandemic trajectory, and infection rate was limited by efficient testing or large scale testing. The infection rate was limited to 0.02% of the population. They had only 9,000 cases at the peak end, and a total of 11,000 cases now. And the death toll also was reduced to less than 1% of the infected. during the peaking stage. Finally, it ended up as a mortality of 1% total infected. USA and UK soon followed South Korea's model, and they were going on the herd immunity model, and they immediately ditched the model to take in the South Korea's rampant testing model. India introduced the low accuracy rapid testing at stage 2 of the pandemic for use with systematic and detailed guidelines of ICMR. So wherein even the negative cases uh, has to go into the quarantining. So random testing was not chosen as the appropriate method in India because of the number of tests being very high to do a random testing, except for the case of Kerala.